his experience of the way he sees the world, basically. It's the kind of thing that sort of lets your imagination go in terms of how a person interacts with their environment. It's very much a record of an experience, of a landscape, of an interaction with that landscape. Apart from the Boyle family, I mean, it does remind me of that, and it reminds me of being in, I think it was in the Leeds Met Gallery, and seeing them and listening to a talk by them. Yeah, and it also reminds me of, dare I say this, things that I do.
It's clearly amusing. I kind of understood that it was about crossing over, and it was an alternative crossing over of a space. I got that. And I guess it was most amusing because there are all the people navigating their way around it. Watching them in relationship to these people doing this absurd kind of version of the same thing. That was my initial response. I mean, it was obviously about an intervention in a kind of public space, about changing perspective on things. In some ways, it was kind of, you know, it was a little bit surrealist because it was about taking normal notions, I guess, of how you do something, and then mixing them up with an unusual notion of that thing, and obviously it's mixing in the whole idea of taboo, which is the idea of walking near or under ladders. So to me, it seemed quite kind of like a surrealist kind of performance, which was about, to a certain extent, disrupting people's everyday life, their normal path from A to B being kind of them having a basic illustration of how it could be different. You know, so it's about you know, showing someone an alternative view of their everyday. The idea of kind of umpires in tennis games, that whole kind of experience of climbing up and looking down.
Well, Yves Klein, of course, sought dans le vide, 1961, when he beat Yuri Gagarin into space by 6 months. I mean, obviously it reminded me of that. A sense of confrontation with the absolute, yeah. And that for me is very special. Yeah, because there's this kind of emptiness inside of all of us, this ex nihilo, which I kind of have to want to fill. Yeah, that's what it felt like for me. It was wonderful. It just it filled my imagination, although I felt there was still something like missing in the centre.
I can't think of any other project similar. It was really interesting. Yeah, I was really interested because you know, it's a piece that plays on the natural acoustics of space, which is an unusual sort of thing to do. So yeah, it was really interesting. Everybody else there seemed to think it was great as well.
It was more of a, you know, like a performance, like a show, than that actual, just necessarily just a piece. You know, it's always a controversial subject of like actually bartering with someone that you feel that they're trying to take your money and like that kind of thing. But I liked how it was sort of like reflected it in this like sort of art form. I think getting people involved and the whole idea of this bartering and what are you bartering for, and like that was what it was about, instead of, yeah, it just gave it a new like opinion on it.
Emotionally, I kind of felt, I wondered what people would think if they overheard my kind of conversations, and I kind of think how it might mean to me, slightly invaded upon, perhaps. It reminded me a lot of this thing that I've already heard before, where somebody was talking about overhearing somebody's conversation, and all the titles for all their drawings they'd ever done was about conversations they'd overheard other people having on the mobile phone or chatting about something random. So ended up with like, "My grandma fucking dropped it" was the title of one of these drawings, things like that. So it reminded me of that really. Slightly invasive as well. I think they'd probably be trying to convey something to do with the way that nothing's special but everything is in a way. Everybody could take something from something else and make it their own. So anything can be public property, or anything can be very personal as well. Just depends on what context and how it's presented to you, or how you've had to present it within yourself.
When you're on a bus, people talk about things that might be worth writing down and putting somewhere else so other people can read them and think. Sometimes I talk about those things on a bus too. Maybe I'm really spending my time quite well talking about those things on a bus with other people, and that they should be art and that other people should pay attention to them like they do with paintings and things like that. A bit like I was on a bus, maybe on the way to work, and stuff in the metro wasn't quite as interesting as it could have been. I was trying to pay attention to what other people were saying, but it started making me feel a bit sick, and a bit like watching Hollyoaks when people start talking about rubbish and it makes me angry, but that's the people that you really live with in Leeds.
I think they were just trying to show that, you live in where you live today, it's had like different pasts and different histories, and this time is like one of them, so it's trying to convey what it could have looked like. Looking at the actual projection made me feel like you got a sense of what Georgian times were like, and it was quite interesting. It kind of reminded me a bit of Rachel Whiteread when she took her mould of the inside of a house, and she wanted to capture the houses that were in the area the way they were. It was kind of like that, but they uncovered the interior of a house.
I found it quite strange because I didn't think it was art. I thought it was literature. So it's quite interesting to think that actually things like that can be art. I felt like going home and reading some of the books they've been talking about actually. It was quite inspiring. And I found that people were talking about books that I'd read, but they read different bits about it and found different things about it that I'd not really thought about. So different people can look at the same thing or read the same thing and actually come out with a completely different experience. And it's about what you put into what you experience that makes what you have out of it unique.
The use of quiet sound work also, like infiltration of sound work, also reminds me of sort of ambient noise of Brian Eno and stuff like that, but everything is everywhere. Made me feel aware of my situation in a role as a toilet user and as well as my role as a person of society.
It's something very, very of the moment for me. It's whether it means something to me, and it doesn't always. I'm not always sure whether I'm getting what the artist means or whether it's something that I'm drawing from that. So it's hard for me to say whether it's what the artist was trying to convey or just something that I'm taking from it. It wasn't so much how it made me feel as the fact it was so accessible on the internet. It's something that where people who aren't going to walk into an art gallery can see it, and it's the accessibility, beauty, the universe, everything.
It's quite cute. 3D glasses are really kind of like cute, and they're entertaining, nostalgic, all those kind of things you've already not predicted but substantiated what a likely response is going to be. So you've kind of refined. So there's no question. Emphasis on the actual elevation from, well, what some people perceive as 2 dimensions and one people perceive as 3 dimensions. And that's hypothetical kind of reasoning has to kind of go beyond the confines of a few, you know what I mean? There has to be kind of a back and forth negotiation between the instigator and the recipient. And there isn't that. There's just a formal played out kind of statement which is taken into consideration a lot prior to what's been said. Being requested and having the option to put on 3D glasses is kind of needs to be distinguished. That's interesting as well. And also because we've come to a stage historically whereby 3D glasses they're not obsolete, but they're still kind of outmoded. They're not used conventionally or scientifically, you know what I mean, so technologically, because